And all right, good afternoon, everybody. We've got a number of people that are still jumping on, so we're going to give it about another minute and then we'll get started with today's webinar. Thanks so much for making the time. I know this is a tough time of year for you guys to get away, and we do really appreciate it. So we'll get started here in about a minute. Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. So thank you again for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know this is a time of year where all of our teachers and administrators and facilities folks are just kind of pulling their hair out. So we do really, truly appreciate you taking the time out to join us and to participate today. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm Becky Anderson. I'll be teaching the webinar today. I own a small hazardous materials consulting company out of Iowa. And I've been doing this guidance for schools, guidance for industry for 25, 30 years now. I've been a hazmat chemist. I've also assisted as an emergency responder for folks. And then in Iowa, I ran a program called Rehab the Lab, where we assisted schools get rid of old legacy chemicals. I want to take just a second to say thanks to EPA Region 1. They are the funding source for these webinars, and they have been fantastic to work with as far as coordinating all of the Zoom setups and everything. And I also want to say a quick thank you to Vicki Davis. She's with the Upper Valley Lake Sunapee Regional Planning Commission, and Vicki is the person that wrote the grant. So I wanted to tell her thank you as well. And then finally, you'll see some photos today from Dave Waddell. Dave Waddell is now retired, but he kind of started the whole Rehab the Lab movement out in Washington State. And he's provided me with some outstanding resources through the year. So the goals of these webinars are to give you some really key pertinent information about chemical risk, how you can assess it, and then how you can work to minimize it in your school and in your classroom. We work diligently, constantly trying to find good solutions for you and to make sure that the material and information is as up to date as possible. So this screen shows you just kind of some Zoom tricks if you have any trouble. So if you're having difficulties hearing or anything, check out that audio or the sound troubleshooting. Also, we do have the raised hand disabled and the chat disabled. But if you have any questions, please type them into the question and answer, and I'll try to either answer them as we're going through the webinar, or I'll wait until the end and we'll talk with you and see if we can get your questions answered then. Also on the last slide, you'll have accessibility to my website as well as my email address and phone number. Please feel free to reach out if you have any specific questions that you need some information about. I'm happy to help you as much as I can. Okay, so what we've done and covered in other webinars is we've looked at what are legacy chemicals. We've looked at how we can minimize risk by getting rid of using 4 criteria to get rid of chemicals that are either too old, too dangerous, they're in excess quantities and we don't need that much, or they've been compromised. The other factor is, does the risk of using them exceed the value that they bring to our lessons? So those are all things that we've worked on previously. We've also talked about how to write a chemical hygiene plan, how to store chemicals properly that you are going to keep. And then we worked last week with facilities personnel to help them understand how they can also protect themselves from any chemicals that are coming in that are dangerous, and how they can also make smart decisions for chemicals they're using in school. So what we're going to talk about today is how to assess chemical hazards. We're going to talk about inhalation hazards specifically, and then we're going to also talk very detailed about some specific labs that we've seen really causing some dangers throughout the United States over the last few years. So again, if you have any questions at all, please type them into that question and answer box. Final couple of housekeeping details. Post questions throughout the presentation here. And please know, if you're watching this, this is pertinent information and it's accurate as of May 2024. But if you're watching this in 10 years, know that you probably should look up the code requirements. My guess is that some of them have changed. So please make sure that you understand that this is most accurate information that we have to date. All right. So We've talked about recognizing and assessing high hazards legacy chemicals. We've also talked with you about creating a safety map of the equipment in your classroom. That will be an important part of your chemical hygiene plan. So we want to make sure that you have that in good shape. We also talked with you about identifying and keeping high quality chemicals in your inventory and what personal protective equipment you need for yourself as well as for your students. We talked through all the different parts of a chemical hygiene plan and the fact that even if you're in a state that doesn't have its own state managed OSHA program, you're still subject to writing and maintaining a chemical hygiene plan and identifying a chemical hygiene officer. And then finally, we've covered all of those things and addressed a number of the components of a chemical hygiene plan. So this is kind of the final step of, okay, what are some of the things that you can do specifically to keep your students safe and also to keep yourself safe? So let's jump in. One of the first things that I want to talk about are student safety contracts. And student safety contracts are, in my opinion, this is really a necessity for all of you. I really believe that every science teacher from about junior high on up needs to have a safety contract in place. The students and their parents both really need to sign those safety contracts. There are a number of examples of those out on the website, on various websites. The primary one that I use for reference is Flynn Scientific or flynnsci.com. Actually, that's one thing, Vicki, if you would type that in, it's Flynn, FLINNSCI.com. And that's one of the examples. They have free examples of various student safety contracts, and that they're the best ones that I've found. Now, one of the keys, though, to these safety contracts is that you have to adjust and amend them to fit your specific school requirements and the specific practices that you use at your school. So please make sure that you make it and amend it to be site specific. In recent years, we've also seen the Chemical Safety Board address a lot of laboratory accidents in school, and we're going to talk through that. I'm also going to give you some examples of videos that they've produced. Now, the Chemical Safety Board they're a non-regulatory board. They are appointed by the president. They work federally, and typically what they do is they investigate industrial accidents that have involved chemicals. Typically, they investigate accidents that are very large scale. They affect communities. They result in fatalities or significant injuries. Several years ago, the Chemical Safety Board determined that, wow, we are seeing a lot of accidents in schools and universities across the country. And as a result of that, the Chemical Safety Board became very involved and started evaluating some of the different problems and root cause analyses of the incidents and accidents that we were seeing. So one of the things that we're going to spend some time today on is looking at some of the recommendations that they came up with. Again, this is not a regulatory agency, and what they do is they look at not only what the source of the accident was, but they also look at the laws that address the accident, and they make recommendations to agencies like EPA and OSHA so that they can improve the regulations to hopefully preempt any further future accidents. There are not any federal laws that I've ever been able to identify that require student safety contracts. However, it's really critical, I think, to demonstrate due diligence on your part that you've looked into and addressed the items of risk that you're going to be conducting in your classroom, and that you put that onus on students that they are going to conduct themselves safely and according to your instructions. And I think that's really critical. There's another example on the National Science Teaching Association, NSTA, also has guidance, and they have what's called a safety acknowledgement form. So it's not really a contract, but it's a safety acknowledgement form, and it's also for students and parents to sign. And then the American Chemical Society has an enormous collection of regulatory support documentation, and they have what's called a student laboratory code of conduct. If you're interested in any of these specifically, you're welcome to send me an email and I'm happy to share these documents with you. All of these examples require both student and parent sign off. And I think it's very important that you make sure that you're addressing the things that are specific and pertinent to your classroom. One of the areas that we see, okay, did I switch? Yeah, I'm sorry, I got confused for a second there on which slide, whether or not the slide moved forward. So considerations for this safety contract, as you are making it pertinent to your classroom, as you're making it site specific, please make sure that you're coordinating your efforts with other teachers. One of the things that we've seen that Chemical Safety Board has noted as a success is if we can have, instead of a lab safety contract, we have what's called a classroom safety contract. And even though there are lab specific items that are addressed in it, if the safety contract covers all classrooms in the school, the consistent messaging and the consistent items that you address and teach your students as far as safety is concerned, the more consistent those are throughout the school, the more we are likely to see compliance, and we're likely to see students participate and understand and know those rules. So if it's at all possible for you to work with your school safety committee to develop a classroom safety contract, I think that's going to provide you with a lot of good, strong messaging that your students will then learn and grow in from year to year. When you are restating rules for the lab, you want to make sure that you're being as detailed as possible and as concise as possible. So these safety contracts, okay. Holy smokes, Katie, that's quite a story there. Oh, and that's one of the things that that's addressed on the bottom of this slide is pushback. And this is tough. And I'm gonna kind of deviate away from the slide for a second, because this is so Katie's comment is she had a student that tried to push his way into chemical stock room. He wanted chemicals to drink. And when she denied him access to that, he went and drank soap and hand sanitizer. She kicked him out of class, told the front office that he had violated the safety contract, couldn't come back. Your administration pushed back. Okay. This is something that I'm hearing from a lot of teachers throughout the country. We have a different environment that we're dealing with right now, especially since we've come back from COVID. I don't know that I have a whole lot of answers for you specifically. I'm disappointed that your administration isn't supporting you more. I do think a lot of teachers are facing this same thing. One of the things that I would include if I were you, a very specific part of this lab safety or classroom safety conduct that you have the students and their parents sign off on, is a disclaimer or a consequence section that says, if you do not follow these classroom safety compliance requirements, these are the consequences and these are the steps that will happen. And I believe if we have that ahead of time, and that you as teachers and you as administrators, for those of you that are administrators that are listening, if you emphasize that, I strongly believe that that gives you that due diligence that your legal folks are going to ask about. And I believe it gives you more protection. There's a resource coming up here very shortly that I'd like you to take a look at also. It's a book. And in my opinion, any teacher that is using chemicals in their classroom, I don't care if it's art, industrial tech, I don't care if they're cleaning chemicals that you're using in your classroom. You need to be aware of what cases have already been decided and what steps those teachers or administrators took to have a positive outcome. And there's a resource coming up in one of the next slides, and we'll talk about that. Suggestions moving forward for you, Katie. That's going to be a lot. So I'd ask that, number one, we take it offline. You send me some emails and we talk a little bit back and forth on email or have a conversation. And then I'm going to need to think about what other steps you can take, particularly since your administration isn't being as supportive as they probably need to be. So I'm sorry I don't have better answers for you. And I think a lot of you are going to, I see Faith, I see you've raised your hand, but we don't have the hand raising available at this point in time. So Faith, if you could just type in your question, or if it's a long one, we can discuss it offline if that's better, or if that's possible for you. All right. I want to get back to this, that we have a lot of information to cover today. And I know a lot of you are dealing with some really challenging situations. I'm going to do my best to cover as much as I possibly can and to give you as many ideas. Okay, no problem, Faith. Thank you. All right. So in your student safety contracts, in your classroom safety contracts, one of the things that I often see that is a problem area is eye protection. And we want to make sure, especially, that we're addressing contact lenses and that we're addressing them with ANSI approved safety goggles. Okay, goggles are really important to include in there in your safety contract because number one, students hate wearing them. And number two, they are critical, especially to prevent those students that are wearing contact lenses. What we have seen over the years is that there are certain types of contact lenses that can actually absorb some of those chemicals. And then we have constant exposure on the eyes, which causes irritation and can lead to things like, anything from eye damage, permanent eye damage, to infections, those types of things. So we want to make absolutely certain that we clearly state when eye protection is required and when students should either not wear contact lenses or have a clear understanding that if they're going to wear contact lenses, they need to wear ANSI approved goggles over the top of them that will prevent any of those VOCs or volatile organic compounds from permeating into their contact lenses. We also want to make clear statements in this, in your classroom safety program or classroom safety agreement contract, whatever, however you guys want to word it, that no chemicals are to leave the lab, and to very clearly, again, define the consequences of if you start catching students that are trying to steal things, remove things from lab, anything like that, that they are just not going to be able to be in your classroom. Please work closely with your administration so that you understand and they understand and you have an equal agreement on what are consequences for those activities. Use the contract, safety contract. I would encourage you to use this for your first day of safety training in lab. And I know it's going to take a lot of time, but I would encourage you to go ahead and make certain that you're going through each of the different sections. Elizabeth, I see your comment that in college you weren't even allowed to wear contacts, that you had to purchase glasses. I think that's the best practice. I know we get a lot of pushback from students that they want to wear their contacts. They don't like wearing glasses. I would agree. And if you're teaching a high-level organic chemistry class, I would agree, no contacts. If they really are insistent upon it, safety goggles, and my guess would be that after one or two times of wearing those safety goggles and having them sucked to their face because they don't allow those vapors in, they're going to probably switch their viewpoint on that. Now, one of the things that I've seen also, please make sure that you're documenting your training and your students are signing off on that documentation. This is a practice that we conduct in industry all the time. I really think it's warranted for you guys to conduct that in your classrooms as well. And all that has to be is just a short paragraph that says, hey, on this day, I taught all my students that we were working with organic compounds. They can't wear contacts. They need to wear safety glasses or they shouldn't wear contacts, but if they do, they're going to wear safety glasses. And have your students sign off on that. That documentation, even though it takes an extra minute or two, but that paragraph of documentation, again, shows your due diligence and shows specifically that you're addressing those safety concerns. Also, I would encourage you to post that safety contract around the classroom. They might just blow through it and not pay attention to it, but I'm a firm believer that the more that you make it present and known that that's the way you're going to operate in your classroom, the more likely it is that you're going to have good, solid due diligence if you do have an accident or an incident in your classroom, and that your students are aware that this is serious stuff. We're going to have this under control. Lab handouts. all of your lab handouts should have safety procedures included at the top or at the beginning of them. And then also I would encourage you to put waste disposal procedures at the end of them. So if you don't have those, please add those in. Instead of just having your lab procedures, we want to make sure that we're addressing safety and we're addressing proper waste disposal. Consider having your students review the safety data sheets. I think that's an excellent opportunity, especially for upper level students, to see what the hazards are, begin to recognize those different sections. And that is a skill that they will have to use when they get out in the workforce, if they're ever using any chemicals, which a lot of them are going to be. And it doesn't matter if they're using them for cleaning or they're using them and actually working in a lab. The more that they can become familiar with assessing those risks themselves, the better off they're going to be. Now, one of the things that also is a decent strategy. Oops, doggone it. I'm sorry, I just lost my screen here. I apologize. Okay, one of the other things that additional training strategies, and then I'll get into the other option for you too, is I want to go back a couple of slides. I'm sorry, I kind of feel like I'm all over the place today, but I really want to address this pushback that we're getting more and more for students. So if you see the bottom of this slide today.
I can't see the slide, Becky.
Oh, you can't? Gosh darn it. I apologize. Okay, there. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Vicki. I'm so sorry. All right. What I wanted to emphasize here, though, given the comments that we've seen or the questions that we've seen, particularly from you, Katie, is that if we do have any pushback from students on something, okay, so if a student argues with you about, you know what, I'm going to wear my contact lenses and, you know, you can't do anything about it, because I have heard more and more that we are getting that kind of blunt pushback from students. One of the things I would encourage you to do is have something drafted up ahead of time that says, if you disagree with this policy, then, and you are adamantly opposed to following it, then ask them to take a statement home and have their parents sign the statement with a notarization. So a notarized statement that says, hey, my student doesn't have to do this. And what we found, I've had a number of teachers that have tried this strategy. And what we find is that the students come back and they have been informed by their parents that no, they're going to follow the procedures. Doesn't always happen, but I would encourage you to have something like this drafted up ahead of time and verify it with your administration. So your administration knows what you're going to do and how you're going to handle it. Because I know we have seen this type of pushback, particularly in older students. Molly asked the question, are there any resources for students who are absent or who transfer in late and miss the training? That's a tough one. I would require that they make up the training. Whether they come in during a study hall or they come in during one of your planning periods, but they are, I think they're need to be required to make up the training. One of the other things you can do is record your training. We have all kinds of mechanisms for you to record those lessons. I don't think they're as effective as, person to person, eyeball to eyeball training for that student to understand just how critical it is that they adopt these safety practices, but that is one strategy you can consider. All right, and we're going to run out of time today, so I'm going to start talking faster and skimming through things a little more. So I apologize. I think these are really, really important concepts for you guys to know and for the teachers to have an understanding of all the different strategies they can do to implement these safety messages in their classroom. Interactive lessons are really, I'm seeing more and more data that shows that virtual safety scavenger hunts and interactive app-based learning is very beneficial, particularly to our students now. There are some apps that are available on phones that you can have students download. I'm not familiar with a whole lot of them. It's not an area that I'm an expert in, but I have seen that there are more that are coming out. One of the other strategies, and I use this in industry all the time, is to conduct what I call a tabletop exercise. Okay, and this is emergency response community stuff, but I'm telling you, it works. What we do is we sit down and we go through a short scenario. Okay, so for example, so today in class, we're going to be using concentrated hydrochloric acid. And every person is going to have a small beaker with, 25 mils of concentrated hydrochloric acid. It's very dangerous. Here's the safety data sheet. These are the things that are wrong with it. So for our tabletop exercise, before we all go out and start working on our lab, we're going to talk about right now, what if somebody tips over that small beaker of hydrochloric acid and dumps it down their leg? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? How are we going to respond as a class? How are you going to respond if it's your lab partner? And when you talk through that what if scenario, what it does is it creates kind of a brain pathway so that your students are more aware of it. The more that you can talk through these short tabletop exercises at the beginning of lab, the more likely it is you're not going to have problems. Or if there is an error, if there is a spill, if there is a problem during lab, your students will know, okay, this is what I need to do. Not going to say it's a perfect method, but I've had a lot of success doing this with adults in industry. So again, we call that a tabletop exercise. If there are any questions about that, if you want to talk through some examples of that, please send me an email or reach out over the phone and we'll talk more about it. The benefits to teaching all of this safety stuff, including how to read a safety data sheet, what are the different steps that they need to do should there be an accident in class? All of those are skills that they're also going to need in the work environment. Safety data sheets are just a common thing in industrial work environments. So it's important for you to help students identify and know how to use those different resources. All right, now we're going to go into a discussion about the dangerous chemicals that we've seen. Chemical Safety Board, again, has been evaluating over the years statistics and stories to determine root cause analysis of what is happening in classrooms where we've seen students and teachers injured. Unfortunately, we don't have one agency that's recording all of this, so we don't have a strong idea of how many of these accidents have occurred. And we've got a number of different agencies that are keeping these statistics, but they, again, there's not a whole lot of cohesiveness. The key to this, though, is for you to actually know which experiments have posed risk and have created the biggest problems in the classroom. So let's get into that right away. Oh, darn it. I pushed the wrong button again. All right. Can you still see the screen, Vicki?
No.
I apologize. I have my...
You're allowed. It's okay.
Oh, man. This is not a smooth one today. I am so sorry. This is my favorite topic, too. All right. Can you see the screen now?
Yes.
Vicki,
Sorry.
okay.
Yes.
Great. Perfect. All right. So we're going to go through examples of dangerous demos. So these are some examples of some recent accidents, and I'm not going to read all of these to you. We're getting close to tight on time here, and I really want you to be able to see the videos that I've got for you. All right. So one of the things, so I have that list. If you would like to see it, you're welcome to email me and I'll present that to you. No problem. One of the things that we've seen is that American Chemical Society has started partnering with the Chemical Safety Board to evaluate these and to figure out what the heck has gone wrong. And what we've seen is that Chemical Safety Board identified 261 incidents between 2001 and 2018. We don't have any more current solid data that's been consolidated since 2018. 130 of these incidents happened at colleges and universities, resulting in 185 injuries and 5 fatalities, completely unacceptable. 66 incidents occurred in elementary and secondary schools, and a total of 170 students were injured. Okay, completely unacceptable. The National Safety Council has estimated that there are 5,000 safety-related accidents that occur in schools in America each year, and 10% of these at least, so 500 incidents a year at least, are in the science classroom. The most common chemical types involved in the accidents are alcohols, isopropanol, methanol, ethanol, followed by nitric acid, hydrochloric acid, and sulfuric acid. So alcohols and then acids. In 2013, the Chemical Safety Board issued guidance that says, and this is after evaluating all of their different, all of the different accidents that they really dug into, do not use bulk containers of flammable chemicals in demonstrations. Please make sure if you're going to do a demonstration up front, that when you pour out some of your alcohol to use as your demonstration, please put the original container away. That's where we're seeing the most accidents. Make sure that you've implemented strict safety controls. Make sure that you have a written procedure, training, and proper personal protective equipment. And part of that personal protective equipment is a barrier between your demonstration and the students. I'm going to say that one more time. Part of the personal protective equipment is a barrier between your demonstration and the front row of the students. And then make sure that you've evaluated all of the different risks. This is a video that was produced by the Chemical Safety Board, and I am going to play it. It's about 5 minutes. I'm going to probably cut it off a little bit short today, but I want you to, this is one that's available for you to use in your classroom.
Can't hear it, Becky. Did you hear me, Becky?
Okay, folks, I'm sorry. This doesn't look like it's going to work. I'm going to go ahead and move to the next one. I'm sorry, I don't know why there's not any sound to this one. Let's go ahead and talk about the next two experiments. So that was the rainbow experiment that creates a lot of problems in schools, and that's probably the one that we've seen the most that has resulted in injuries and accidents. And it's again because the rainbow accident is one where you take alcohol and you mix a little bit of each type of elemental salts with it, things like barium chloride, things like strontium chloride. You mix a little bit of that into the alcohol, you light it on fire to show the different wavelengths of the chemicals that are present. What we've seen is that the little Petri dishes that are used for that frequently will light on fire. One color will frequently burn out faster than the other colors. And we've seen numerous occasions where an instructor then or a teacher then will take and try to pour a little bit more ethanol or whatever isopropanol into those Petri dishes, and it will light the entire container on fire and result in the first row of students being badly burned. So bad deal. This is the next one, and I'm going to just show this. There won't be any sound with it, but you can see it. But this is another example.
No sound.
All right. Okay, so what we saw there is this is a common, um, this is a common lab experiment as well, where you burn a $20 bill or you burn a some denomination of money. And what we see there, that was on let's see, public television, and that was a teacher that has years and years and years of experience. And what you see here is that she lights the bill on fire. And then when the bill starts burning, instead of just the alcohol starting to burn, she dips the burning bill back into her alcohol source. And then it takes off even further, and then she actually spills the alcohol source. So this is another experiment or demonstration that we have seen a lot in classes that has resulted in really bad outcomes. So please, again, and you'll note that this is a teacher with a lot of experience, and yet she has no fire suppression. She has no personal protective equipment other than safety glasses. She doesn't have any barrier between herself and the demonstration and the students or the film person for this example. And she's got open containers of flammable liquid. So all of these lead to some big problems. There's also what's called the whoosh demonstration. And I'm going to go ahead and show you this. This has no sound with it, so I'll just kind of talk you through this. This is the whoosh demonstration that's gone wrong. And what this is where you light, there's a large bottle. You put a little bit of alcohol in the bottom of it and light it. And that then, and in that particular case, again, we had no fire suppression, we had no personal protective equipment. And in that example, the container blew up. And we have seen this too. So if you're using the rainbow demonstration, if you're using the magical burn the currency, or you're using the whoosh demonstration, those are all really high risk. And I would encourage you to rethink those. Those are not demonstrations that are, the risk with those demonstrations does not provide you with nearly the benefit of what the lesson is. This is the resource that I was talking about earlier that I would encourage you, if you are using demonstrations in class, this is one of the resources that's available to you. You can purchase it out on flynn.com, flynnsci.com. And it's a little bit older. It's I think a 2011 resource, but it has specific cases that have been where students have been taken to task or faced litigation from they faced litigation for an accident that has happened or a student's actions in their classroom. The primary messages out of this is that students, administrators, and school districts can be held liable. There are some cases in here that show that students or that teachers have been held liable. Teachers have what's called a duty of care. And the duty of care means that you have to select the proper experiments, warn students of the dangers, and then actively work to mitigate those risks. And that's also out on the National Science Teaching Association's website. I would encourage you to take a look at that. And again, if you're teaching an upper level science class where you have chemicals that are pretty risky, I would encourage you to get a copy of this. It's about $30. If you're teaching risky labs, you need to be aware of how this has, how litigation has been handled in the past and what the results have been. All right, we've talked about student contracts. We've talked about training. We've discussed dangerous labs. Next up, we want to make sure that we're going to go through how we make solid decisions on what labs and what chemicals to use and how we can minimize exposure to you and your students. We're going to first go through what OSHA calls the hierarchy of controls. And basically, this is OSHA's process, and it's typically targeted at industry, but I'm going to tell you, I think it's really valuable for you to use as well. The OSHA hierarchy of controls basically says there is a structure that we need to use when we're evaluating risk. And the very first thing that we should consider is if we've identified a chemical or a process that is risky, that's going to present us with the potential for injuries, accidents, fatalities, fires, any of those types of things, then we want to evaluate, is this something that we really want to do? Or is this something that we need to eliminate? We want to also evaluate then the next level down. If we can't eliminate it and we can't eliminate this particular lesson, is there something we can substitute in that makes it less risky? So instead of using methanol, which is not only highly flammable, but also toxic, can we use isopropanol? Not nearly as toxic, still very flammable. Substitution is the second step. The third step is engineering controls. This means things like I'm going to work in the fume hood. I'm going to add ventilation by opening windows if possible and cross-ventilating with fans. So I'm blowing any vapors that are in the classroom out of the classroom. The next step down is what are called administrative controls. And Molly, this is an excellent question. What about labs that are overfilled and therefore made more dangerous by scheduling? Absolutely. And that's where administrative controls come in. There should be a number of students that are supposed to be in a lab classroom according to your either fire regulations or the National Science Teaching Administration, NSTA, also has guidance on this. If you're still getting too many students in your lab classroom and your administration isn't listening to you, I don't have a good answer for that, and I'm sorry. I would say that what you need to do is make sure that you're familiar with the regulations at the Fire Marshal Institutes and that you're familiar with what the National Science Teaching Association says, and that you provide that information to your administrators. Sometimes I think that they don't know and they don't understand. And so if you can present that to them logically in writing what the law says, it might make a difference. That's really the only suggestion that I have. The last line of defense that we always need to think about when we're talking about safety is personal protective equipment. We want to try all these other strategies first. The very last line of defense then is personal protective equipment. And that's for you and your students. Ventilation is always a huge issue that I hear about from labs and from art classrooms. Ventilation is considered an engineering control. And this is a common concern that we hear from a lot of different schools. We need to make sure that we have, in addition to working ventilation, that we understand where the exhaust from the ventilation goes and that we have an appropriate source for makeup air. That's considered dilution ventilation. That's where, for example, if you're working with an experiment that has a lot of vapors or a lot of off-gassing, we're opening windows and we're pushing those vapors out of the classroom. Not ideal at all. Look to elimination and substitution to minimize that risk as much as possible. Working with snorkel hoods, that's usually an affordable option for schools to install. Also working closely with your administration and your facilities folks to see what additional ventilation you can add in. If your school does not have budget for additional ventilation, then you need to really consider what chemicals you're using and adjust your experiments to reflect the exposure emissions there. Make sure that if you do have a fume hood in your classroom that you are using it for demonstrations and experiments. You don't want to use it to store your goggles. You don't want to use it to store your waste chemicals or chemicals that you're going to be using, not regularly. And then also make sure that you know where that hood is ventilated to. Because if it's ventilated to the classroom next to you and you're starting to work with something really stinky, not a good plan. To check your fume hood and make sure that it's working, on the bottom right is a little picture of a fume hood velocimeter. And you can get one of those off of Amazon for about 30 bucks. So if you need guidance on that, I'm happy to share that with you. The face velocity of the fume hood with the sash open at the ideal location. So, you know, the fume hood goes up and down. So we have a specific location where it has the most draw. And we want that to be 100 feet per minute, or FMP. The velometer is, there are ones that go up to about $1,000, and that's what the black box is in the center of your screen. If you can't test this because you don't have the right equipment, ask your facilities. This might be another option too, or this might be one of the support things that your insurance company can provide. I do have a lot of insurance companies in Iowa that are the insurance companies for the schools that will come in and conduct face testing for fume hoods. So that might be an option for you as well. All right, to minimize chemical exposure, this is what a blast shield looks like, or a barrier shield. And this is what you need to have in place if you are going to be doing demonstrations that involve things that catch on fire, things that blow up, things that spark, any of that. You want to have this barrier between you and your first row of students. They cost anywhere from $300 to $500. They're most easily accessible or available on flintsci.com. There are other companies that sell them as well. And what this is it's a real thick piece of plexiglass connected to a very heavy base. So the base is actually metal and it's very heavy, so it doesn't blow over. But that might be an option for you as well. And you might want to take a look at the design of them. And it could be something that you could build yourself or work with your facilities people to get built. I'm going to recommend, though, that you just look at the ones that are available on Flynn Scientific and use those. I think they're the best option. And again, if you don't have one of these, then you shouldn't be doing those dangerous demonstrations. I'm going to encourage you to err on the caution side anyway and really minimize the risk of the experiments that you're doing. Minimizing chemical exposure, one of the things that we need to think about with all of the chemicals that we're using and all the chemicals that you're bringing into the classroom are, what are the potential hazards? How do you protect yourself and your students? And then, is there something that you can substitute that's safer? The other piece that a lot of teachers don't really think about when they're designing their curriculum or they're picking which experiments they want to conduct in class is, what are you going to do with the waste that results from that? And that can be really challenging, and we've talked about that. So New Hampshire and you're going to need to reach out to your state people for guidance for hazardous waste disposal. Vermont, you have a lot of resources out on the internet to help with your disposal suggestions or options. And you need to make sure that you're tapping into all those resources and decide what you're going to do or how you're going to handle that waste before you do the demonstration. Anytime we're considering chemical exposures, what I want you to also keep in mind is that small bodies are much more impacted than large bodies. So if you are working with younger students, there is going to be a much greater impact from things like toxic chemicals. So evaluate whether or not the value of using that chemical and conducting those experiments exceeds the risk associated with that. Got to really think through that. A few webinars ago, we talked about using a safety data sheet to evaluate toxicity. And we talked about any of those exposures that results in, or on the safety data sheet, have 50 parts per million or less for permissible exposure limit or short-term exposure limit in that toxicology section of your safety data sheet. The magic number there was 50 parts per million or less. So if it takes 50 parts per million or less to create a hazard, you really want to evaluate whether or not that's a chemical you want in your classroom. There are 4 different routes of exposure: inhalation, absorption and contact, ingestion and injection, The most frequent concerns that I have for classrooms are inhalation, because we see a lot of volatile organic compounds that are used by teachers that fill those classrooms with vapors. Please, before you go ahead and decide to implement something like that, please evaluate whether or not you have the right safety equipment in your classroom to make that a good choice. And continuously keep in mind that personal protective equipment, safety glasses, gloves, aprons, those are all last line of defense. That's the last thing that you want to focus on. Excuse me. All right, to minimize chemical exposure further, this is just kind of a list of safety equipment that you need to have and make sure you have in your classroom, as well as personal protective equipment that you and your students need to be implementing. Got to pay attention to the vapors that are coming off of things. If you are going to do a demonstration that involves anything that's flammable, please make sure that you're pulling those fire extinguishers close to you, and please make sure that you have that barrier between you and your students. So if something goes sideways, the barrier is going to take the heat and the flame, not your students. Make sure that you've got a fully stocked spill kit in your classroom. Test your eye wash station and your emergency shower. And if you don't have the equipment to test those, because they're going to flood your classroom if you pull the emergency shower, please work with your facilities folks to make sure that they have been tested. Anytime we can minimize exposure and we can minimize risk by eliminating and substituting out different chemicals, that's a big win. So constantly keep that in mind as you're conducting your experiments. Student contracts and training on those contracts. Micro trainings before every lab on what are the risks with the chemicals you'll be using today, and how do you prevent an accident in your classroom. Those micro trainings are critical. And I think it's a good idea for you to, when you're conducting those micro trainings, to also have your students sign off that they've been trained. They listened, they paid attention, they've been trained. It's one of the areas that I've used in industry for years and years, and it's really beneficial. Implement administrative controls. This includes procedures. So the very first procedure that you pass out to students should be, this is how we're going to handle things safely today. The last procedure after they go through the steps of what the experiment is what do you do with the waste? And then make sure that you use personal protective equipment enforcement. Enforce the use of personal protective equipment. And if you have a student that is pushing back adamantly against using personal protective equipment, then move back to your, or go back to your consequences based on your classroom safety contract, and make sure that you're enforcing that. All right, next week, and again, I apologize for the bumps today. This is the first time that I've tried to include videos, and that definitely added some challenges. If you would like those videos sent to you on email, I'm happy to do that. They're free out on YouTube. That's where I got them. The Chemical Safety Board website is outstanding and offers fantastic lessons that I use in industry and that I think would be beneficial, especially in some of your advanced science classrooms. If you're teaching an environmental science classroom in particular, that might be a good option for you to pull some of those Chemical Safety Board videos. And the other ones, the demonstration ones that went sideways, I'm happy to share those with you. I think they teach us good lessons on things that we shouldn't do in our classroom. It's just a bad day, bad deal. Please ask your art teachers to attend next week. We'll be addressing safety in the art room next week. And then the week after that, we'll work in industrial hygiene. I'm sorry, industrial technology. So we'll be focused on safety and industrial technology. If you have any questions that I haven't answered today, if there are specific situations that you'd like to talk through, please, again, you'll have my email here shortly. I'm going to go ahead and put that screen up now. This is just kind of a summary of what you can do today, to improve chemical safety in your classroom. Evaluate those chemicals, make sure that you understand the risks associated with them. If they are determined to be by you, if they're determined to be too risky, what can you eliminate? What can you substitute in? That's a safer option. What are some of the ways that you can further minimize your risk? Are there green chemistry demonstrations and experiments that you can do? Are there smaller scale lab experiments that you can do? Both the National Science Teaching Association as well as the American Chemical Society have fantastic collections of all of these. I would encourage you to go through their websites and pull down as many of those free options as you can. They do have some great resources out there that are very easily accessible to you. And then finally, make sure that you remember that RAMP acronym: reduce, recognize, assess, minimize, and then prepare. The more that you can talk through after you've identified safety risks to your students, the more you can talk through a tabletop exercise of what do we need to do if this happens. Those little micro trainings go a long way. I've seen it very beneficially move industry forward enormous steps. And I would encourage you to use that same strategy in your classroom. Please ask our teachers to attend next week. This is my contact information, and you're welcome to reach out. Again, I apologize for the bumps today. No more videos embedded in the presentations. Didn't work so well. So thank you again so much for your time. Do any of you have any other questions that I can help you with? We've got about another 30 minutes. Any other questions? All right, that's all I've got for today. Thank you again so much for taking time out of your schedules. I know it's really tough this time of year. Please reach out if there's anything that I can help you with.